What if everything you believe about life and death is completely wrong? I was a physician assistant, grounded in science, logic, and medicine. But during the birth of my son, I died, flatlined for over 7 minutes. What happened next shattered every belief I held about reality. I didn't see darkness. I didn't feel fear. Instead, I left my body and entered a realm so vast, so deeply peaceful, that I didn't want to return. I watched my lifeless body from above. I saw shadow beings that drained my energy. I met guides made of light. I remembered everything: why we're here, what love truly is, and why most of us have it all backwards. You're going to question everything after hearing this, because once you know what's really on the other side, you'll never see life the same way again. This isn't just another near-death story. This is a message for anyone who's lost someone, feared death, or quietly wondered if there's more. Watch now, before the noise of the world drowns out the truth your soul has been waiting to remember. It's hard to believe it now, but it's been nearly 17 years since that day, the day everything changed. At the time, I had just finished my physician assistant training and was working my first full-time position in a hospital in North Carolina. I was 6 days past my due date with my second child, a little boy. My firstborn was already 3, and I was juggling the joys and exhaustion of early motherhood with the long shifts of the ER. That morning, I felt a strange tightness in my chest, not the kind that sets off alarm bells, but enough to make me pause. I brushed it off as anxiety. After all, labor was imminent, and my mind was filled with checklists and logistics. I called my husband, Aaron, and told him I thought it might be time. We gathered our things, kissed our daughter goodbye, and drove to the hospital in a soft spring rain. Labor began slowly but steadily. I remember the nurse smiling and telling me I was progressing well. I remember the sound of the fetal monitor, a rhythmic comfort. Everything was going according to plan, until it wasn't. It happened in seconds. One moment I was laughing with Aaron about the name we had finally chosen, and the next, I felt an intense pressure in my lungs. My chest began to flutter like a trapped bird, erratic and terrifying. I turned to him and whispered, "I can't breathe." He called for help, and within moments, the room was chaos. I don't remember the exact order of things after that. A code was called. I was placed on my side. Oxygen. A flurry of voices, footsteps, urgency. I was being wheeled out of the labor room toward the OR for an emergency C-section, but I wasn't scared. That still strikes me as odd. I wasn't frightened. I just couldn't get air. My entire focus narrowed down to a single desperate instinct: breathe. And then, silence. A profound, unnatural silence, as if someone had taken the world and pressed mute. I felt something shift, something intangible, a pressure lifting, a kind of detachment. The physical sensation of suffocating gave way to an overwhelming calm, like warm water surrounding me on all sides. My vision blurred, dimmed, and then vanished entirely. But what came next wasn't darkness. My eyes opened, but they weren't my eyes. At least not in the way we usually mean it. I wasn't inside my body anymore. I was above it, high above, as if the ceiling didn't exist. I was looking down from some elevated vantage point that didn't make logical sense. There was no fear, only the most peculiar neutrality, like observing something through frosted glass. Familiar, but distant. I saw people moving fast. Nurses, doctors, someone handing a bundled cloth. Blue. I remember the blue vividly, from one side of the table to another. I didn't know it then, but that was my son being delivered. He was alive. That fact would only register later. In that moment, I didn't recognize my own body. I didn't think, that's me down there. I had no memory of being human, no anchor to identity, just curiosity. I noticed little black particles, dozens of them, rising up from the body, as if being pulled toward where I was hovering. They shimmered and vibrated like static, forming a pulsating cloud around me. It wasn't frightening. It wasn't pleasant either. It just was. Then, I felt something change inside me. A stirring, a pull. The kind of pull you feel when someone calls your name from far away in a crowd. Not a voice, but an intention. I didn't resist. I was too fascinated by what I was seeing. I drifted, slowly at first, and then faster. Through a wall I didn't know was there, through a light I didn't understand. through a space that wasn't space, and into something else entirely. The light wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. Not from the sun, not from a bulb, not even in dreams. It wasn't just visual. It had weight, warmth, and a kind of silent music humming through it. I moved through it, not by walking, but by intention. Where I thought to be, I was. It was so different from everything I knew in the physical world, and yet it felt like returning home to a place I had forgotten existed. There was no tunnel, no fire, no gates, no wings, but the sensation was unmistakable. I had crossed over. I had died, and I was not alone. Shapes began to form within the light, at first blurry and indistinct, like mist catching form. Then they sharpened into figures, not human in any earthly sense, but familiar all the same. Their bodies were elongated, smooth, and wrapped in flowing robes that seemed to be made of both fabric and energy. There were no faces, but somehow I felt their expressions. They radiated kindness, and something else, recognition, as if they knew me, as if they had been waiting. I didn't speak, but I communicated. Or rather, we communicated, through emotion, sensation, and something I can only describe as vibrational thought. I could feel their message inside me before I even fully grasped it. You are safe. You are eternal. You are loved. And then something happened that I still have trouble explaining. It was like a download of everything. All my questions, some I hadn't even consciously formed, were answered in a rush of clarity so overwhelming that I felt I might dissolve from the sheer truth of it. I wasn't being taught in a linear way. It was remembering. And the one truth that towered above everything else was so simple, so complete, that it cracked something open inside me. Love is everything. Not the kind of love we write in greeting cards or struggle to hold together in relationships. No, this was origin-level love, the force behind every heartbeat, every galaxy, every moment of joy and suffering. Love not as a feeling, but as the structure of all existence. It was me. It was them. It was the light. And yet, something pulled at me again. A flicker, a subtle call from far off, like someone touching the edge of your consciousness. I looked to my right and saw something new, an opening, a circular space bordered in soft gray and white light, with shadowy figures standing inside it. They weren't frightening, just unknown. And in front of them, a child, a little boy, perhaps 6 years old, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and faded denim overalls. He needed help. I felt it in my chest like a magnet, so I moved toward him. As I got closer, I saw the other shapes more clearly, adult-like, vague, as if drawn in fog. They had no faces, only forms, but their presence didn't scare me. I felt calm, curious. I wanted to understand, to help. Then, unexpectedly, they began to move, quickly, one by one, darting toward me and then away. I felt something shift, a tug inside. I was being drained, not physically but energetically, as though they were taking small pieces of me as they passed, absorbing light from me without malice, almost like instinct, and I let them. I wanted to help, but then I noticed I was fading, not dying again, but unraveling, like the edges of my soul were coming undone. That's when something inside me screamed silently, "Wait, I don't want to go." And just like that, I was pulled back, not by force, but by response, as if the entire universe had listened to that tiny, desperate whisper from my core and had answered, "Okay, not yet." I was back in the light, but it felt different now, quieter, as though the download had paused, the message waiting for me to choose the next chapter. And you, watching this, maybe you're here for a reason too. If this story touched something in you, even if it's just a feeling you can't explain, please consider subscribing. It's not about numbers. It's about connection. This community is a space for people who've glimpsed the edge of something bigger, whether through an experience of their own or through stories like this one. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt a love that didn't come from this world? A dream? A sign? A moment that made you stop and wonder? I'd love to hear it. As I hovered in that strange, quiet limbo, something began to shift again, not externally, but within me. A gentle current was moving me, guiding me, but never forcing. The energy around me had weightless substance, like I was gliding through intention itself. And then I found myself moving, not drifting, but speeding. The environment around me shifted into a kind of dense, particulate darkness. It wasn't scary. It felt like traveling through the raw material of the universe, as though atoms and light had melted together into a velvety, pulsating space. I had no body, yet I felt movement. I had no breath, but I felt alive. My awareness was expanding, as though I could see in all directions at once. Past, future, sideways in time. There was no fear, no questions, only presence. Then I slowed, and just ahead of me, within that dense space, something like a vortex opened up, a swirling soft funnel of light. But instead of pulling me in, it poured into me. Information, emotion, memory, understanding. All of it flooded through me in an instant so vast and yet so intimate that it bypassed language entirely. I didn't hear a voice, but I knew what was being shown. I was being reminded of everything, every lifetime I'd lived, every soul I'd ever encountered, every thought I'd sent out into the universe, every intention, every act of kindness, every choice born of fear or love. It was all there, not as judgment, but as clarity. And again, it all pointed to the same truth. Love is not an emotion. Love is the fabric of what we are. And in that moment, I knew something else. This love, this eternal essence, it has never left any of us. We just forget. Then I saw something that nearly brought me to my knees. If I had knees. I saw the moments in my life where I had been cruel, or impatient, or closed off. Not in a shaming way, but as ripples, tiny echoes that moved outward into others, into situations, into the world. But I also saw how one small act of compassion I once offered to a stranger on a subway had created a chain reaction I never could have predicted. I had changed someone's entire path, and never knew. And then I saw my son, not as a baby, but as an energy, a soul, before he was born. I saw how he had chosen me, how we had made an agreement before either of us came to Earth. He would be born through me, and his presence would be my greatest teacher. He wasn't just coming into this life for his own growth, but for mine. I saw how our lives would intersect, the challenges we would face, and the immense joy we'd share if I chose to go back. And for the first time, I felt something close to conflict, because in that moment, I didn't want to return. I had tasted eternity. I had remembered who I really was, and the thought of squeezing all of this knowing back into a human body, of forgetting again, of enduring pain again, it felt almost unbearable. But then, from the edge of that space, came a new feeling. It wasn't a message, not even a memory. It was a vibration, choice, a soft nudge asking me to consider, do you want to go back? Do you want to finish the story you started? I didn't answer right away. I floated there, in the stillness, aware of everything and nothing at once. And then, I remembered something my grandmother used to say. Even the stars need darkness to shine. It echoed inside me, and with that echo, I felt a spark of willingness return. Maybe, just maybe, I could carry a piece of this love back with me. Maybe I could live in a way that reminded others who they really are, too. So I whispered, without lips, without sound, yes. And with that, the current shifted once again. The moment I agreed to return, I felt something like a current wrapping around me, gentle but firm, as if the universe itself was cradling me for the journey back. I wasn't afraid, but I was profoundly aware of what I was leaving behind. The peace, the clarity, the sense of oneness. It was like setting down a piece of my soul, knowing I'd spend the rest of my life searching for it again. As I began to move backward through that space, I passed once more through the dense, velvety particles, the same ones that had carried me into this dimension. But this time, the movement felt more deliberate, like the energy around me was preparing my spirit to re-enter the body. I felt weight returning. I felt boundaries forming. The awareness of being me, as a separate being, began to solidify again. Before I completely crossed back, I caught one final glimpse, those luminous beings from earlier. They hadn't left. They stood in the background like quiet guardians, their forms shimmering like candlelight behind sheer fabric. I couldn't see their faces, but I felt them smiling. They didn't speak, but I received a message nonetheless, not in words, but in meaning. If you go back, share what you remember. It will matter more than you know. I held that message as tightly as one can hold a vibration. Then came the fall. Not a literal fall, but a drop in frequency, in light, in vastness. I felt like I was being condensed, squeezed into a space too small to contain all I now carried. The transition wasn't painful, but it was intense, like being folded 1,000 times into a human form. My awareness began to narrow, no longer everywhere, no longer everything, just here, just now. And then, pain. It ripped through my chest like lightning cracking stone. My entire body convulsed under the weight of it. Air pushed into my lungs by machines. The weight of gravity. Noise. Beeping monitors. Frantic voices. The hum of hospital equipment. And above all, the unmistakable ache of returning to a place where separation was real again. I didn't open my eyes right away. I couldn't. But I could feel the heaviness of the world. I could sense the confusion of my body trying to remember how to be. I was intubated, I later learned, and had been placed in a medically induced coma. But in that first fragile moment, all I could register was the overwhelming contrast between where I had been and where I now was. Eventually, I heard voices, some panicked, others exhausted. One, familiar. Amy, can you hear me? Aaron. My husband's voice cracked with fear and relief, and something inside me cracked too, not from pain, but from the sheer beauty of being loved enough that someone waited for me to return. I couldn't answer, but I felt a single tear roll down my face. They told me later I had been clinically dead, no pulse, for just over 7 minutes. They had attempted CPR, but complications forced them to stop mid-resuscitation to deliver our son. For nearly 2 minutes, my heart lay still while they performed the emergency C-section. My body had experienced an amniotic fluid embolism, a rare and often fatal complication. By every medical standard, I should not have survived, and yet, I had, and so had he, our baby boy. I didn't get to hold him for the first 2 days. My body had to be stabilized, my lungs healed, but when they finally placed him in my arms, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, something inside me broke wide open. He looked into my eyes, his gaze still cloudy from birth, and in that moment, I remembered that vision from the other side. I had seen his soul before he was born. We had known each other before this life, and now, here he was, breathing, real, blinking up at me like he already knew who I was too. There are no words for that kind of full-circle grace. The days that followed were strange, like living in a half-dream. I was alive, technically, breathing again, conscious, but something fundamental had changed. The world around me, which used to feel so solid, so unmovable, now seemed paper-thin. It was as if I could see behind the curtain of reality, like the stage lights had been turned on and the illusions of daily life exposed for what they were, temporary, fleeting. People came and went from my hospital room, nurses, specialists, family members. They all spoke with concern, with joy, with relief. But I watched them like someone who had just arrived from another planet, trying to remember how to be human again. Every conversation felt a little distant, like I was underwater, listening through glass. But there was one constant, my son. Every time they brought him to me, something ancient stirred inside. Holding him wasn't just bonding, it was remembering. I knew he wouldn't remember what I had seen, at least not right away, but a part of me was sure he had known, had been part of it. We had met in that realm of light. We had agreed to find each other here. I tried to speak about what had happened. At first, to Aaron. He listened, kind and patient. But I could see the confusion in his eyes, the discomfort. He was a man of science, a man who loved facts and measurable outcomes. And here I was, talking about floating above my body, about beings of light, about love being the foundation of the universe. It didn't fit the world he knew, and I couldn't blame him. So I stopped trying, for a while. But the memories didn't stop. If anything, they became louder. They would come rushing back to me in waves, especially at night. I'd close my eyes and suddenly feel myself moving through that particulate dark space again, as if my consciousness was trying to return while my body slept. And every time, I'd awaken with tears on my cheeks, not from sorrow, but from longing. I missed it. I missed home, and yet, I knew I had chosen this. I had made a promise to return, to remember, and to share. The first person I shared it with, truly, was a nurse named Linda. She had been with me during those first difficult days after I came out of the coma. She had gentle hands and eyes that looked like they had seen more than most people ever talk about. One morning, as she was adjusting my IV, she said softly, "You weren't ready to leave, huh?" I looked at her, startled. "What do you mean?" She smiled, calm and steady. "You were gone longer than most. We didn't think you were coming back, but something told me you would. Some people, when they go, they don't come back the same. You have that look." That was the moment I knew I wasn't alone. Not just in what I'd experienced, but in the world itself. There were others like me, others who had seen through the veil. Maybe not all through death, but through dreams, visions, meditation, grief. The veil is thinner than we think. Over the next few months, I healed slowly, physically and emotionally. My heart grew stronger. My lungs began to function again. But my soul, that took longer. I began journaling, mostly at night, pouring everything I could remember onto paper. The colors, the feelings, the sounds that weren't sounds. I was terrified I'd forget. Terrified I'd wake up one day and that world would vanish like a fading dream. But it didn't. If anything, the more I wrote, the clearer it became. One night, holding my son against my chest, I whispered to him, "I remember who you are." He didn't respond, of course, but I felt a warmth rise between us. It was like he knew, or maybe I just needed to believe that he did. As time passed, I started returning to the world in pieces. I was able to walk again, then drive, then return part-time to work. But nothing felt the same. The hospital halls I once moved through with purpose now echoed with questions I couldn't ignore. I would look at a patient in pain and see more than just a diagnosis. I saw their light, flickering beneath the surface, struggling to remember itself. Every time I touched someone's hand, listened to their story, or gave them news they didn't want to hear, a part of me was also seeing beyond them, to the eternity I knew we all came from and would one day return to. It was overwhelming at times, like carrying a secret too large for my own bones. I didn't know how to talk about it. Not really. What words could I possibly use to explain that death isn't an end, but a return? That every act of love here is a mirror of something much bigger? That the real world isn't this one, not in the way we think? I kept trying to find the right language. I read near-death experience accounts, spiritual texts, ancient teachings. Some mirrored pieces of what I had seen. Others felt too small, too boxed in. Most of all, I kept writing. It was the only way to let some of it out without feeling like I was losing pieces of it along the way. One evening, I sat alone in our backyard, watching the wind move through the trees, and I thought, what if we've had it all backward? We spend so much time preparing for life, school, work, money, relationships, but we prepare for death with fear or not at all. We treat death like failure, like a tragedy. And yet, when I was there, it was peace. It was home. Death, to me, is not the opposite of life. It's the other half of it. I realized something else that night. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of dying, not of suffering, not even of loss, because I had seen the other side of it, and it was more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. And if that's what waits for us, if that's what we come from, then what are we so afraid of? The next morning, I called Linda, the nurse who had quietly held space for me in those early days. I asked if she could meet for coffee. When we sat down, I looked her in the eyes and said, "I think I need to talk about it. Really talk about it." She nodded, like she had been waiting, so I told her everything. From the moment my chest fluttered to the instant I saw those shadow figures, to the light, to the beings, to the child, to the choice. I expected her to look at me with confusion, but she didn't. Instead, she took my hand and whispered, "You're not the only one." That simple phrase cracked something open in me. Not fear, relief. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that maybe I wasn't alone, that others had crossed over and come back with pieces of the same truth, and maybe we were meant to find each other, to connect the pieces, to remind the world. After that, I began to speak more openly, with trusted friends, with people who were grieving, with patients who were nearing their own crossing. I didn't preach. I didn't claim to know everything, but I shared what I had seen, what I had felt, and more often than not, people would look at me, not with skepticism, but with quiet recognition, a softness in their eyes, as if some part of them remembered too. I began to wonder, what if we're all carrying a memory of the place we came from, a sacred echo, buried beneath all the noise of this world? Maybe that's what love really is. the part of us that still remembers. Somewhere around the first anniversary of my experience, I found myself sitting on the floor of my son's room late at night. He was fast asleep, his small chest rising and falling with perfect peace. A soft nightlight cast golden patterns on the walls, and the whole room smelled of warm milk and talcum powder. I should have felt tired, exhausted even, but instead I sat there, completely still, trying to hold on to something that words couldn't touch. That evening, I had had a moment, a flash. While rocking him to sleep, I had looked into his face, and for just a second, I saw beyond him. Not in some metaphorical way, but truly saw something deeper, something older, a memory, a soul, a being far wiser than his tiny body could explain. The feeling was so sudden, so overwhelming, that it left me breathless. It confirmed what I already knew, but still struggled to believe fully. He had come from that realm, the same realm I had touched, and he brought pieces of it with him, just like we all do. But as we grow older, those pieces get buried under layers of fear, duty, and forgetfulness. I thought about how many people walk around carrying grief, fear of death, trauma from loss, how we try to outrun the very thing that will, one day, welcome us back like a mother welcomes her child. We treat death as an enemy, when it's really just the closing of a circle we never truly left. And that thought led to another. What if part of my journey was not just to remember, but to remind? Not with loud declarations or certainty, but with tenderness, with stories, with quiet truth. Over the months that followed, I became more intentional in how I lived. I slowed down. I listened more. I hugged longer. I looked into people's eyes and tried to see not just their face, but their light. When I spoke with patients, I didn't rush. Even when the schedule said I had 10 minutes, I gave them my presence like I had all day. Some moments were small, almost invisible. A smile, a hand on a shoulder, a question asked with genuine care. But I began to see how those little things carried weight, soul weight. They stayed with people. They softened them. And sometimes, they came back to me. A patient would return and say, "You made me feel seen." Or a nurse would say, "You remind me to breathe." Those were the moments I knew I was still living the truth I had seen, that I hadn't forgotten. But there were challenges too. Not everyone wanted to hear about near-death experiences. Some dismissed them as hallucinations or the product of a stressed brain. Others nodded politely, then changed the subject. For a while, I worried I was imagining things. That maybe, just maybe, I had wanted the experience to be real so badly that I had constructed it. But those doubts never lasted long, because every time I questioned, the universe seemed to answer, through a song lyric at just the right moment, or a child's spontaneous wisdom, or a stranger sharing their own story of loss and light. These weren't coincidences. They were reminders, anchors. One particular evening stands out to me. I had been giving a talk on trauma recovery to a small support group, and after I shared my clinical insights, something nudged me from within. Tell them the truth. I paused, took a breath. Then I said, "I once died, and what I saw on the other side changed everything." The room went silent, but the silence wasn't discomfort. It was attention, readiness. As I spoke, I saw tears, nods, wide eyes, and afterward, one man in his late 60s approached me and said, "I've never told anyone this, but when my wife passed, I saw her in a dream, and she told me she was okay. I never knew if I could believe that, but now, I think I do." That's when I understood. This story, my story, isn't really mine anymore. It belongs to all of us. As more time passed, something unexpected began to happen. I stopped needing to convince anyone of what I saw, not because I gave up, but because I realized the truth I carried wasn't something to be argued. It was something to be lived, quietly, genuinely, not shouted from rooftops, but embodied in how I showed up to the world. There was a sacred kind of confidence growing inside me. Not pride, not certainty, but a deep-rooted knowing, the kind that doesn't need applause or validation. I had touched the eternal. I had walked through the veil and returned. That knowing would always live inside me now, like a lamp that never burns out, no matter how dark things get. And things did get dark, sometimes. I struggled, even years later, with the contrast between that realm and this one. It's one thing to experience infinite love. It's another to come back to a world where people suffer, hate, and destroy. There were days I felt completely unfit for this version of life. I'd look around and feel like an alien among my own kind, craving the purity of what I had known on the other side. But every time I felt that distance pulling me into isolation, I'd remember something else I had brought back with me. The promise. If you return, share what you remember. It echoed in me like a vow, not one imposed from outside, but one made by the deepest part of my soul. And sharing didn't always mean telling the story directly. Sometimes, it meant smiling at the woman who looked like she hadn't been seen in weeks. Sometimes, it meant holding the hand of a dying patient and whispering, "You're safe. You're not alone. There's more than this." I remember one moment in particular. A teenage boy, maybe 17, had been in a terrible accident. He was unconscious, and his parents were pacing the hallway outside his ICU room, consumed with worry and fear. I was called in to check on him during a night shift. I stood there beside his bed, machines beeping steadily, the fluorescent light too harsh for such a delicate hour, and I felt it again, that shimmer, that thin veil, like the space around him was charged with the presence of something more. I closed my eyes and sent out a single message, not as a doctor, not as a mother, but as a soul speaking to another soul. Whatever happens, you are held in love. A day later, he woke up, and the first thing he said to his mother was, "It was so bright," and I wasn't scared. Moments like that reaffirmed what I knew to be true. Not every soul needs to die to remember. Some only need to come close, and some just need someone to remind them. I also noticed changes in my own relationships. My marriage, for instance, went through its own transformation. Aaron had struggled in the beginning, unsure how to relate to the woman I had become. I was softer now, but also more inward. Less interested in small talk, more interested in silence, connection, meaning. At first, that distance scared him, but over time, something unexpected happened. He began to open too, not to my experience directly, but to the way it changed me. He saw how I loved deeper, how I listened with more presence, how I held space for him in a way I hadn't before. And little by little, the man of logic and reason began to ask different kinds of questions. One night, long after the kids had gone to sleep, he sat beside me on the porch and asked, "Do you think they're still with us? The beings you saw?" I smiled. "I don't think they ever left." He didn't say anything else. He just reached for my hand. That was enough, because sometimes belief doesn't come with words. It comes with stillness, with presence, with being. By the time 10 full years had passed since my near-death experience, I had stopped calling it that altogether. Near-death didn't feel right anymore. I hadn't come close to death. I had crossed over, and I hadn't just returned. I had remembered. The experience no longer lived only in the past tense. It had become a companion, a quiet presence that walked with me through every room, every conversation, every heartbreak and celebration. I didn't need to tell everyone I met what had happened. Sometimes, all that was needed was my attention, my stillness, my ability to be with people in their most vulnerable moments without looking away. One of the greatest shifts, perhaps, was the way I now experience time. In the other realm, time didn't exist. Everything happened all at once and not at all. But here we are ruled by clocks, calendars, alarms. Yet I found myself moving more slowly, not because I was weak, but because I refused to let time dictate what mattered. If my son wanted to stop and watch ants carrying crumbs across the sidewalk, I stopped. If my elderly neighbor wanted to tell me a story I'd already heard twice, I listened like it was the first time. And if someone was grieving and said, "I don't think I can make it through this," I didn't try to fix them. I sat beside them in the dark, knowing they were already held in light. The truth is, I came back to this life with one mission: to love better. And loving better didn't mean saying the perfect thing or doing everything right. It meant being present. It meant seeing people not just for who they are on the outside, but for who they are beneath all the noise. It meant recognizing that every angry outburst, every tear, every awkward silence, every failure was still sacred, still worthy, still part of the path home. I often thought back to that little boy I saw in the realm between worlds, the one in the wide-brimmed hat and overalls, surrounded by shadowy figures. For years, I wondered who he was, why he appeared, why he needed help. And then one day, it hit me. Maybe he was me. or a piece of me. Maybe he was the part of my soul that still needed healing, the part that had given too much of herself, lost her voice, lost her light. And maybe those figures draining me were not evil, but symbolic, representing the ways I had allowed myself to be pulled apart by expectations, perfectionism, and fear. It wasn't just a spiritual message. It was a call to come back to myself. I think we all have those shadow figures in our lives, the voices that tell us we're not enough, the pressures that drain us, the moments where we give so much that we forget who we are. But the miracle is, if we notice it, if we name it, we can begin to call our light back home. And that's what I've tried to do every day since I returned. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but with intention. Because I know now that this life, messy, flawed, beautiful as it is not a punishment, or a mistake, or some kind of test. It's a gift. A chance to remember, in slow motion, what I learned all at once on the other side, that we are made of love, that we are never alone, and that nothing, not even death, can separate us from the source of who we really are. There are still moments where I ache for that realm, where I close my eyes and long to return to the warmth, the weightless love, the absolute knowing. But then my son laughs from the next room, or my patient squeezes my hand, or a stranger offers unexpected kindness, and I realize heaven isn't gone. It's here, in fragments, waiting for us to notice. There's something tender about knowing you've been given a second chance. Not the dramatic kind where someone rushes in to save you, but the quiet kind, where the universe itself hands you your life back and whispers, "Try again, but this time remember." That's what every day feels like now. A soft invitation to live slower, deeper, more truthfully. And I don't always get it right. I still get impatient. I still forget. I still fall into distraction, frustration, fear. But I no longer mistake those moments for failure. They're just part of the remembering. A spiral path home. The more I live with this awareness, the more I notice how many people are carrying quiet awakenings of their own. A man who lost his wife and started painting for the first time in his 60s. A woman who survived a car accident and now volunteers at hospice centers, holding the hands of strangers as they cross. A teenager who had a dream of her grandmother after the funeral and said with tears in her eyes, "She told me not to be afraid." We are waking up, all of us. Sometimes through pain, sometimes through stillness, sometimes through death, but always through love. And if there's one truth I brought back with me, if there's one message I could tattoo across the sky for the entire world to see, it would be this. We're not here to get it right. We're here to remember who we are, and who we are is love. I no longer worry about what people believe, whether they think this was a hallucination or a miracle or something in between. That doesn't matter. What matters is what we do with what we're given. If my story has found you, then maybe you were meant to hear it. Maybe something in you has been stirring too. A question, a memory, a sense that there's more than the stories we've been told. Maybe this is your sign. So here's my invitation to you. If something inside you whispered yes while you were listening, if you've ever felt like there was more to this life than routines and roles, if you've ever sensed a love bigger than words, a light behind the veil, a purpose in the pain, then stay with us. Subscribe to this channel not for me, but for you, for the part of you that longs to remember. And more than that, I'd love to hear your story. Have you ever had a moment that didn't make sense, but made you feel more alive than anything else? A dream, a sign, a goodbye that felt like a beginning, a peace that arrived when it shouldn't have? Share it in the comments. Don't hold it in, because this community isn't just about my experience. It's about ours. It's a place where the veil is a little thinner, where we can tell the truth without fear of being called foolish or broken. A place where we remember together. And if you're still not sure what you believe, that's okay too. Sit with us. Listen. Ask. Wonder. That's how it started for me. One breath, one question, one moment of surrender. And then, everything changed. I leave you with this. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are not alone. You are light in a body, a soul in motion, a thread in the great tapestry that began long before you were born and will continue long after. Be gentle with yourself. And when you forget, because we all forget, come back here. Come back to this space. Come back to the story. Come back to love.